Hello, everyone. Welcome to this side event on mobilizing youth for disaster risk reduction in the framework of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction. This is an event co-organized by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and the UN Major Group for Children and Youth in collaboration with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. My name is Sergio Perez. I work for the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and I'm very glad to be able to welcome to this side event. And I'm looking forward to the next 60 minutes where we want to have a discussion and explore together how can young leaders drive progress in achieving the implementation of the Sendai framework, but also how can government partners contribute to bringing youth actions and youth leadership up to scale. And also we want to identify how can we enable together transformative leadership by young people in disaster risk reduction and resilience building. We are going to do this through a conversation with young activists and scientists, which will be in a panel, and also with a broader interactive exchange with with all the audience that is listening to us right now. And we will have also some concluding remarks by the representative of the Swiss government. A session like this should be owned by young people, and so I'm very glad that we will have as moderator a young scientist, Daisy Hessenberg from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Thank you very much, Daisy, for accepting this challenge of moderating this mission. And the floor is yours. Thanks a lot and have a good session.
Thank you, Sergio, and thank you everybody who's joined us online. I'd like to welcome you to this very exciting and important, mostly panel session that we have today. I've been told that in the audience we have decision makers from government, we might have some youth out there, we're going to have a whole range of experience. And spoiler alert, we hope in the middle of the panel to actually get to know you as well a little bit better. So there will be a Menti where we ask you just a couple of questions for you to look forward to. That being said, we've got an absolutely brilliant panel that we'll be featuring today, which you'll get to know shortly, followed by a closing from Regina Guyan, the Deputy Head of the Multilateral Affairs Division of the Swiss Humanitarian Aid Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. So she's going to cap this panel for us and really push our vision towards, well, this was great, what we learned, what can we do next? Now, before I explain why this is such an important event, and then we dive into the panel itself, I also wanted to encourage you, please do ask questions. So after the Menti, there'll be a wonderful opportunity for the panel to take questions directly from the audience, which is absolutely what we want to see. So why are we here today in this specific panel? Why have you come here? Well, I think we can all accept, we know the challenges that we face. We've all seen the horrifying statistics. We can feel the impacts of the climate crisis. We all can look out of our windows and to varying degrees see the biodiversity crisis. And this all comes together in feeding into the field of disaster risk reduction. And personally, as someone who's experienced severe flooding in my home in Czech Republic, the statistics like 1.6 billion or over 20% of the world's population will be at risk of flooding in 2050. So the urgency is there. We know that. And if anything, we're probably feeling a little tired and frustrated about the scale of the crisis. We also do know what we have to do. This is not a mystery. We're not solving everything today. We know that we need to reduce mortality and the number of affected people. We know we need to reduce the loss and damages that we see from disasters. And we also know what we need to invest in, that we need to, think about the strategies for the different for different countries and get them up and running. We need more international cooperation with specifically developing countries as well. And we need that availability and access to early warning systems and disaster risk reduction information. Now, for many of you, hopefully in the audience, you're like, well, that all sounds very familiar. Yep, she's talking about the Sendai framework, which is another reason why we're here today. Because I think the other thing we know is that youth have to be part of this process. They are, by definition, what makes an action sustainable through time, because they are the next generations and the link to the future. So we know they're part of the solution. And today we'll be focusing a little bit, not just on their actions and how we can work together on these solutions, but how that can link to real policy and decision-making changes. So it's not just about what we need to do, it's how are we going to do it. And I think that was very much mirrored at COP. We're hearing a lot of promises in the world about what we're going to do. So now let's make sure we do it properly and most cost effectively, which means including youth at the decision-making table. But I'm going to take my hat off now as someone who's a young professional herself and put on back my moderating hat to start off the panel. And we're going to start it off with a bang with a very short video that will give you a taste of two of our panelists and what they stand for. So we've got 4 panelists, and this first video is specific to 2 of the youth joining us today. So we've got to play the short video, please.
SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, is supporting youth to address burning issues and challenges through inspiring ideas and initiatives that mobilize thousands of young people. Youth have woken up. They want to change the world. This is why SDC's latest initiative inspires young people to act now by mobilizing 1 million concrete actions for a more sustainable future. Join the 1 Million Youth Actions Challenge and act now.
So as part of my preparation for this event, I had the pleasure of exploring the 1 Million Youth Action Challenge platform, or 1MYAC. I promise we won't use any more too many acronyms today, but we will be using 1MYAC for the purposes of time. So I encourage you to go and check it out, because we do have 2 of the ambassadors here with us today. So I'm going to introduce them all individually, and we're going to hear a little general statement from each. So first of all, it's an absolute pleasure to introduce Insaf Abdelmoula, who's here with us from Tunisia. Besides being a 1MYAC ambassador, Insaf is a medical student who is really passionate, not just about climate action, but about engaging youth leadership in that. And so she has quite the list of action that she's doing herself. I'm not sure when she finds the free time, so it's really a privilege to have her here. You know, she's project coordinator and global board member of things like Planting for the Planet, Plant for the Planet. She's also founder and president of Unite the World. So she does a lot of action herself. So Insaf, if you could start us off with, you know, why is mobilizing youth for DRR such an important topic today?
Well, I think that we can't talk about DRR without talking about climate change. And I think climate change is a crisis, is an issue that concerns youth the most. Why? Because of intergenerational inequality, basically, because we, the youth, are the ones who will have to suffer the future consequences of climate change. We are the ones who will have to solve it. We are the ones who will have to find a solution for it in the future. So we are the ones who are concerned the most, especially that we mainly see that decision makers and politicians are not really taking action, or at least they're not taking the necessary action. So we, the youth, need to take action for ourselves, and we need to be the ones who move to solve this crisis.
Thank you, Insaf, and we'll come back to a few of the things that you brought up there. So it's also a pleasure now to introduce your fellow 1MYAC ambassador, the 1 Million Youth Action Challenge ambassador, Willard Fini-Folo, who's here from Malawi and Zambia, representing quite a few different countries today, Willard. Willard has a great background also in data. So he's studied computing and information systems at the Malawi Polytechnic. And besides also, you know, being a senior comms officer at an organization, My Community and My Responsibility, I have to say Willard has a wonderful vision of the future. So we're not able to show it today, but he does have a future, a hope for what we need in 40 years from now. So Willard, same question to you. Why is mobilizing youth for disaster risk reduction specifically so important today?
Thank you very much for this platform. As the young leaders, I take it as very important to include the young leaders in decision making like this, because we young leaders we are agents of change. So according to the Sendai framework, there's a lot of action that we young leaders, we have to blot in as inputs into the tables as we make this decision, so that we can influence the policy to be more youth focused policies, so that the youth can be carried along when implementing such agendas. So I take it as very important, because the climate change is also a factor in the many areas, including a factor in the solid waste management, because when there's a high temperature, it affects the waste decomposition, and also sometimes it affects the waste collection, such that odors are too much stronger. And not only that, because of a high temperature or the climate change issues, also affects the access to loads and other ways whereby we manage it. We manage the waste. So when the loads are breaking because of a flood, then there's no access of load where to deposit the waste. So this is a high risk in the disaster. So the climate change does a lot, even when the flood affects the where we put the waste. It means the waste will be offloaded into the water sources, breaking the hydroelectricity power, while on Malawi and Zambia, we rely on hydroelectricity power. So in that case, it affects even the economy, the electricity power, and so many like that. So that's how we are here as young people. We have to be carried along. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willard, for also keeping us very securely in reality and reminding us who is really feeling maybe most of the cost, as well as has the most to gain from bringing these partnerships together. So we're gonna move now to a non-WANYAC ambassador, but someone who also is very much interested in acting for youth leadership. So Eric Kushel, who's specifically interested in remote sensing and the role of remote sensing data in disaster risk reduction. He is a PhD student at the University of Life Science and Natural Resources in Vienna. And besides always wanting a job in nature and having a strong link to the mountains and environment, has really a passion for the youth leadership side of things. So he's a member of a young scientist platform of the Disaster Competence Network in Austria, as well as the DRR science policy focal point for the Sendai Children and Youth Stakeholder Group. So Eric, looking now from also a young scientist's point of view, why is it so important to mobilize disaster risk reduction for young scientists?
This is several points that's important. The role of youth is very important for us in science. That on the one hand, the older generations are leaving. The boomer generation is leaving the stage, and this role is not yet filled completely. And mobilizing youth for disaster risk reduction is also an important point in transferring knowledge from one generation to another, but and keeping this knowledge alive, but also to get the voice of youth interacting more with political decision making. Both are, I think, very important. And also one big factor is, of course, the point of citizen sciences and the impact of youth that can have on citizen science.
Very glad you brought also up citizen science and who has, and also that data aspect of gathering knowledge from different aspects of society. We'll be coming back to that, I'm sure, which allows me to introduce our last panelist, Alex Opgenot. And I'm absolutely fascinated in Alex's work. Alex is going to bring us back not just to reality on the ground of what's happening, but also putting it in our current context a little bit with the COVID pandemic. Now, today's discussion will not be about COVID. But it is around, it is all part of our lives right now. So Alex has finished a master's. So she did her postgraduate at UCL London in the risk and disaster and resilience, looking specifically at understanding how pre-existing vulnerabilities and understanding the menstrual cycle in things like the COVID-19 context. So Alex, quickly over to you before we move on to our questions on why is youth engagement or mobilization on DRR specifically so important right now?
Yeah, so firstly, I would like to thank you all for this opportunity. So my contribution to this forum today is related to mental vulnerabilities and risk. So to quickly elaborate on that, mental needs are often unaccounted for in disasters situations or just not prioritized. So my personal research has highlighted this by illustrating the great increase of mental vulnerabilities in the UK during the COVID-19 pandemic. And throughout my research, it became obvious that it was mainly due to the stigma and the neglect of body politics, and illustrated that mental inequality is not merely a problem in developing countries, as a minority of people might think. So it has an immediate effect on the mental vulnerability in the pandemic for the lack of mental products, for example. We saw the absence of mental education was a big problem for young people. There was even a ban in the UK for mental products in one of the supermarkets, as it was classed as non-essential. Another important example was limited access to practical interventions, such as the lack of availability to insert or remove contraception or collect contraception, which is another example of where menstruators' dignity and control over their own body has been compromised. So it is an issue what we should address through gender relationships, so like through revisiting the heterosexual and patriarchal setup from society, as well as looking at the regional and social and cultural norms wherein these shames and stigmas and inequalities are created but also nurtured. So I think to resolve this problem, we should take a holistic approach when looking at menstrual vulnerabilities, as it is not a problem of just period poverty. It is like an issue was also not just social class related, as everyone is impacted by it, well, all menstruators, and it is because of gender inequality that menstruators are impacted in the way that is often unconsidered. But yeah, I'm looking forward to discuss it further, so yeah.
Absolutely. I think I could really listen to you talk about that for a lot longer, and I look forward to learning more. So actually, Alex, I'm going to come back to you as well, because you brought up something very important, which is the gender side of things, especially in disaster risk reduction. And I'm sure there's a panel here called Mobilizing Women or Mobilizing Genders for Disaster Risk Reduction. And of course, that's intersectional. Gender exists within youth at every age and across races. So thinking of maybe specifically about gender, but also the general question, for you, Alex, what are some of the things we can do better, or what are the enablers if we want to have more diverse leadership in disaster risk reduction and resilience building to improve our disaster risk reduction strategies? What's an enabler there for you?
I think one of the things is education as well. I think people are in schools are not really educated, like from a young age, about disaster risk and resilience. What is interesting, because in certain countries like Japan or something, people are educated about it. In the Netherlands, you are educated about floods, but not about other disasters. So it's just whatever, or hazards, I should say, whatever is appropriate, I think. And then throughout the pandemic, for my personal research, you saw that, for example, mental education has been fully neglected. What of course creates another vulnerability, because some young people are reliant on that education. So you create different vulnerabilities by ignoring the needs of young people. So there are like different dimensions of like how to make young people more resilient, but also to include them in decision making. Sorry, it's quite a wide answer.
It's okay, we're not solving it all alone today, but you brought up a really good point, and it's no surprise that education comes up. in a panel about mobilizing youth. So I wanted to pick up on something that that INSAF maybe you can help us out with, which is also coming in from the climate angle and thinking a little bit about this education aspect. For you, what are the primary enablers to get this kind of to get youth to be part of the decisions on things like education and what they should learn from? Because I know you are part of something that's teaching youth, specifically empowering youth leadership and teaching those kind of skills. And I think when we hear education, we think specifically about high school or university, but education is also much more than that. What's the enabler for youth to be part of the decision-making process, even about their own education on disaster risk reduction? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think what matters is that youth take initiative, because you can't always, just like you said, you can't always rely on decision makers and politicians to make the right decisions. So, for instance, since you mentioned education, like the initiative that I founded and that I work with, we try to compensate for all that we think is lacking in the educational system. So we work basically on like what is called parallel education. So all like the essential skills that are not like provided by the educational system. And sometimes it's things like as simple as being environmentally responsible, things as simple as just soft skills, how to be a leader, in your community, how to thrive to better your community. And so basically that's what we do, because we see that in high schools, in middle schools, in the educational system, there isn't really an encouragement for youth to be leaders in their communities and for them to better their communities. So we work on that. We work on capacity building, giving youth the knowledge and the skills, and of course, pushing them and encouraging them to be those young leaders.
Yeah, so youth need to also take that first step, take that initiative, and perhaps we can now, Willard, I could ask you, because I know you're an example of that, of a youth, someone who represents youth, who's taken initiatives of themselves. And what was the enabler to allow yourself to become a leader in disaster risk reduction and resilience? And how can that be expanded to other youth?
What enables me is because of the ground that we are right now. I have been experiencing some challenges in a situation that they really affect our communities. So then it made me to be as a social hub specialist that I can connect youth groups in my societies and other youth-ready associations, so that we can come together, so that we can create a concrete decision to achieve the framework, and also to effectively reduce the disaster risks. So because I believe that the collaboration and also implementing things together in a groups as a young people, it makes a high great significance, so that the change can be much to the ground and bring an effective impact through the association with the other peoples. Because we don't want to see the negative effect to affect our communities for a long time. But I think that if we can rise up and continue bringing the actions that can reduce the disaster risks, can make a high impact to the country.
Brilliant. And we will come back to Willard and INSAF to hear, what can an action look like? A very tangible example of that. We'll come back to that. But I wanted to bring you on screen, Eric, because one thing is a tangible action is what has inspired Willard, which is community, right, and partnerships, and using that to work together on disaster risk reduction. So I know you're part of this, young scientists platform, and I imagine that is an enabler for diverse and transformative leadership. So in your opinion, how can something like that, or how can young leaders who are interested in things like that drive progress in achieving things like implementation of the Sendai framework?
Basically, everybody can immediately start having an impact. However, the size of the impact is strongly influenced by what possibilities they have. And the thing is, one thing that is lacking next to education is, I think, also often is funding. And the biggest issue is young people may have good ideas, may want to get involved, but the ideas mostly lack the funding or the base support to actually achieve anything. And I know some countries like Norway who have, at least for young scientists, these very small grants that are basically for Norway. The grant size is like a micro grant at best. They've enabled young scientists to be more active. How do you get involved into larger communities like the DCNA? Well, how do you say that? One of the biggest factors is the education that you can have in an academic environment, like the DCNA, for example, is, where it's necessary to have a certain amount of education, which is in the end severely limited from getting it at school, getting it in university. And it's how do we increase this? In Middle Europe, we're very comfortable. We have very easy access to schooling systems, university level, where everybody can get all the knowledge that they want. But in other countries that are less fortunate, this might be the biggest issue: funding and access to knowledge to start with anything. And not only knowledge about disaster risk reduction, but even knowledge where one could find that knowledge, and where could they find, for example, the 1 Million Action program, challenge program.
So there's a sort of a gap in education. There's also, we heard from Alex and INSAF how some things are missing also from that education. And on top of that, just knowing where you can find things to know about can be difficult, which paints a pretty bleak picture. So I'm going to ask the other three panelists. Alex said everybody can take action, but funding really helps. Do any of you have an action that could only have been done because of some funding that you received, or also just to describe an action that you've taken towards things that some of the goals of the Sendai framework in general? Go ahead, Alex.
Just to be awkward and coming back to the previous point, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that what Eric was saying, it is the opportunities and everything. And I think what's especially really important, what I was noting down, is that there are not a lot of opportunities, even in, like what you said, like we're quite comfortable in Europe. But I don't think loads of people are not that young people are not that comfortable in Europe, as in like they don't have as many opportunities as they would like to have. And then with COVID, there's such an increase of young people and with families, which are the increase of socioeconomic disadvantaged families. And then that increased the vulnerability of people. So there are more vulnerable young people who are not able to get out there to talk about their vulnerabilities because they don't have the opportunities to get out. So the only people who will be included in DRR will be the people who are not from socioeconomic disadvantaged backgrounds, because they have the opportunity, the finance, the opportunity, the education to get out there. Because on the end, if you want to go to university, you need to be lucky. You have the advantage of having the financial backing and everything. So I think that's one thing we should also try to account for more, that people from more vulnerable backgrounds, that they can be included in the discussion, because I think that's at the moment missing a lot. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to add to that point.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Alex. INSAF or Willard, do you want to add to that on this maybe issue of opportunity and funding? INSAF, go ahead.
Okay, if I may, so like I absolutely relate with what Eric and Alex said about just what they struggle with. But just I wanted to say that the lack of funding is an issue not just for young scientists, and not only in the global north, but also in civil society and also in the global south. But the thing is, in the global south, we don't just have problems with funding, but we also have problems with corruption, with nepotism, with bureaucracy. So I don't know, like if you wanna like get a piece of paper, it's gonna take you months. It's gonna take you an eternity to get that piece of paper, and you need that one piece of paper to get another one piece of paper. And then you see all these different people who are bribing corrupt officials or cops or I don't know what, and they can get whatever they want. And you can't, even though you are someone who wants to work for a good cause, you are someone who wants to make change, you are someone who wants to work for the good of society, basically. But you can't do that because not just because of lack of funding, but because again, corruption, bureaucracy, and nepotism, and just a bunch of other issues.
Wow, absolutely. I heard a quote at COP26 that corruption was one of the largest risks in terms of climate action. But I see Willard has something to add on top of Insaf's point.
Yeah, actually, in terms of funding, it's also a problem because the funding might be there, but the people who are sitting ahead, they're the ones that control the fund. So this brings a challenge for the young people's action to be actualized, because the people who are handling such a fund, there are people that do not consider the young people in the decision tables, and therefore, as a result, they found that most of the fund, the highest percentage doesn't go to the youth actions; it goes to their own actions. So that's another effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willard. Yeah, so funding is there, but the people who are handling the funding not interested in putting youth at the decision-making table. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that all of this was now very bleak, but then again, we have lots of movements like Fridays for Future, which are acting basically on no funding at all, at least here in Austria. And even though it's a very bleak, especially from what Insaf has mentioned, which I can also relate in Middle Europe, quite enough, maybe not as much as the global south. There are youth is or very young, and not only the very young, the Fridays for Future youth, who are normally just teenagers and high schoolers. They are trying to move something with practically no funding, or just a little bit of the pocket money that they have. And this is, for example, still like at least they at least try to move something, even against all odds.
So we have we've heard a couple of different bleak statements, and I do want to move to the Menti for our audience and to come to some of the questions from the audience. But before I do, I just wanted to ask each of our panelists just a quick question with a one-sentence response, just a few words. We've heard we've heard a demand for education, and a demand not just for funding, but for where that funding is going. So if you could speak, what do government partners need to do to bring youth action and leadership to scale, and specifically in terms of, if they're handling the funds that are supposed to get to youth action on the ground, what do government partners need to do for that to happen?
Transparency, clearly transparent process. First, a transparent allocation of funds, and the willingness to invest money in youth, and then a transparent and, from my point of view, scientifically sound and transparent chance of funding. So like young people can, with an idea, can apply for funds. Doesn't need it. People always say they think that it needs to have immediately a few million euros or something. A small grant of 1,000 euros or a few thousand euros can be a very good starting point for most youth projects.
Insaf, Willard, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the government partners should invest by coming up with the Youth Action Prize. So through the Youth Action Prize, thereby the more youths will be attending such prize to implement their actions. And also there should be a statistics on how many youth actions have been welcomed into the Youth Prize action. Through that, then we can see the achievement. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you brought up as well the statistics, because we also heard from Eric earlier how involving youth actually can create better data for us to use as well by working with their knowledge. Before we go to the Menti, Alex, Insaf, is there anything that you'd like to add at the moment on, and we can come back to it after the Menti as well, how can government partners contribute? What can they really do to bring youth action to the scale that it needs to be in disaster risk reduction when it's been successful in climate action more, maybe? Insaf, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. So I absolutely agree with what Eric says. I think those like organizations need to invest more in youth, but I think the reason why they don't invest as much in youth is because, let's be honest here, youth is not being taken seriously, because we often think that, I mean, come on, seriously. I'm seeing Eric laughing, and it's serious. Like, we don't take youth seriously. And we often, like, I don't know, like, we think that intelligence or experience comes from age, or because, you know, we're like, it's like a very famous example, what Donald Trump said about Greta. Because, I mean, she's an amazing person. She's a serious activist. And he dismissed everything that she said and all that she stands for by saying that she's a teenager, and he didn't take her seriously just because she's young. So to generalize from that, I think that we need to believe in youth. We need to take youth seriously, and therefore invest in youth more.
Really well put, Insaf. Even with someone who sometimes struggles with memorizing a lot of facts, take youth seriously. That's a very clear message to be sending to government partners. So, Alex, how would just to close it off, how do we get government partners to take young people seriously? What do they? Well, not what do young people need to do? What do government partners need to do? Let's put this on them.
I think includes more variety of people. I think that's definitely lacking. If there are young people included, it will be a small group of a certain type of people is included. So I think one of the super important for me, as in, well, I would say for DRR, is to include a variation of people and create more opportunities for people to be able to participate in discussions. I think that is so important. And then, coming back to education, I think education is really important. So start educating people from a younger age so that they are getting empowered through education.
So again, pretty simple to show that you're taking, not just to show, but to take youth seriously, involve them in the decision making, bring them into those areas, but don't just throw them in there with no support or education. Help them with the tools while understanding that you're going to learn from them as well. And that's what we've heard from Eric and Willard. So we're going to give the panelists just a moment to breathe and hear from the audience now. So we've got some great audience members in the room, and I believe a link to a Menti will be shared in the chat for you. So please do go click on that link in the Menti, or you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code. It'll be shown on the screen to you shortly, 31074786. So we're just going to ask a few short questions of the audience here, and let's see how we can get this moving. So again, if you just click on that link, you can do it on your laptop. You can also access it on your phone by going to www.menti.com. You can see at the top of the slide here, and then you just put in the code 31074786. We're going to start with a couple of easy questions and then one that you can get your teeth into. So first of all, we just want to know who in the audience today, what countries are there? Who are you representing out there? It might be where you were born. It might be the country that you're working in. So we've got, so that we know the diversity out there, because we heard today things like the words global south, global north, mountains. We also heard about soil degradation. There is country-specific context, of course, to disaster risk reduction, and then as well, the youth actions that can be taken there. So we've got quite a good amount from Switzerland, where I am at the moment as well, and from Europe also, Austria, the Netherlands, and the UK. We've got some participants joining us from Africa, Tunisia, Malawi, Algeria as well, and Libya, and a few brave people from, maybe they're not there right now, hopefully not, because it's very late in Thailand, and welcome as well from Denmark and Kazakhstan. So I'll give you a couple more seconds. Please do go to that link, because we're going to then have two more questions for you. So I'll give you a little bit long. I'll give you 10 seconds, shall I? Yes. But wow, we're seeing a lot of people representing Switzerland, which is, it's wonderful. And there is a very strong, and maybe we'll hear from Regina later today, the strength of youth action, specifically on things like climate and disaster risk reduction in Switzerland. So welcome also from Kenya and Zambia there. Wonderful to have such a varied audience. And so the next question, which goes very much to the heart of the discussion we just had, was how many years of experience do you have in disaster risk reduction, between 0 to 50 years? And then we've added a question on this scale to say, and how much hope do you have for the future? Where if you say 50, you think the future is absolutely going to work out and be a sustainable balance between people and nature and economy, versus 0, well, you're really not sure what we're trying to do today, because what's the point? So please do vote and tell us how many years of experience do you have, and what is your level of hope for the future, specifically in terms of disaster risk reduction, in order to us to be able to handle our natural hazards in all the different aspects of disaster risk reduction. Okay. So from here, we can see we've got someone with 15 years of disaster risk reduction. And on the other end of the scale, we've also got some people with maybe just a year or less. And I have to say, hope for the future is extremely scattered in our audience. And the reason why it was important for us to get an idea of years of experience is, Insaf, what you were just saying, that we don't take youth seriously because we say, oh, well, they don't have the knowledge. They haven't been working on this for very long. And equally, it's also important, of course, to acknowledge the wisdom of age and length of years of experience. But specific, maybe that's something we can go into after the Menti, the specific uniqueness of youth that gives them that different level or understanding of knowledge for the future. Okay, so we have a scattering of hope. There's some people who are very hopeful, and I hope we can bring a little bit of hope to the rest of the audience. So that brings us to our final question. And in the meantime, of course, please continue to write questions for the panelists. But first, I'd like you to have a think, take your time, and think about what you would say to youth today. So what would you say to the Insafs and the Willards in the room? What would you say to the Alexes out there, and the Erics out there, and also all the youth that aren't represented in this panel? what would you say to them to give them hope, to let them know governments are listening and will bring them into decision making? Some of the quotes I have written down are so funding is there, but the people who handle the funding are not interested in youth. That decision makers are not listening to youth. What are tangible words of hope or examples of initiatives that can show that governments are listening and give us some hope here today? And while we're waiting for the audience to answer, and I think our panelists might also be writing something, but if any of the panelists want to already answer live to this, please feel free. We did have when we prepped for this meeting, we talked about hope. And one thing that came out was that youth gave people hope for the future. So here we go. Keep being active. So not just single actions, but actions over time, giving people hope. Looking from a private sector frame, so seeing the engagement from the private sector in DRR and policy gives people hope. See things that are moving in the right direction. So maybe not as fast as we need them to, but the funds are there and we need to keep asking, how do we use them? Keep being active is coming up. So keep fighting, keep speaking up, show elders what is important to you. Don't give up. So know that if you're feeling a little hopeless, you're not alone, and that there are others who have those moments of doubt, and keep speaking. You've got to be so much loud. We've got so much louder in the last year. So governments have to listen. So the hope being that governments won't have a choice. My agency reads dissertations from young researchers and disseminates the knowledge broadly internally. So taking real steps, not just so youth to speak loudly, but other people to hear it and to spread that knowledge. Okay, I'll give just a few more seconds. But a trend, I think, is to keep moving, to speak up and be loud, to be loud in the right places as well, looking perhaps at the private sector. Be collective. People who think the same will speak loudly. So not just speaking for yourself, but perhaps like some of our panelists today, finding those communities where you can join together to say something that can be heard, resonate a little stronger as it's from a group. Okay, now we do have access to this Menti, so even if you're putting in your words late, I'll leave it open. I'll stop sharing my screen now and we'll head back to our panelists for some final words. So keep moving. Just keep doing the work. Is that something that resonates with the panel, or is there a specific direction that we should be, something specific that we should be keeping in mind as we move forward for mobilizing youth and disaster risk reduction?
Maybe the thing is speaking up to your elders, mm-hmm. and working more collaborative. One thing that I've witnessed is that youth has one problem also, and that is for the example from Donald Trump looking down on Greta Thunberg. The same happens the other way around, that the youth often looks down on the elders. Why didn't you do enough? And the problem there is lots of frustration and anger, which leads to nowhere. These feelings are there, have to be addressed, but they should be put aside to see more clearly and work for a better future. Just speaking up to your elder in a disrespectful way and discarding their knowledge might lead to an even bigger disaster than working together.
Okay, and I see Insaf nodding there. So Insaf, is there something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Eric said. But to build on the question that was asked for the audience, and I hope I can answer it as well. I think really, especially for people coming from the global north, do not wait for the government's permission for you to take action. Do not wait for the government to take you seriously and for the officials and decision makers to allow you to take action. Take action for yourself, take initiative for yourself, and go out there and change your community for the better and just take action. Do not wait for the government to care.
Yeah. Do not wait. And there's an audience member I'd like to address with that statement, because in our questions we've had someone who's proposing, really, I think a European cluster for disaster risk reduction really should focus on how to organize youth initiatives from all Europe countries in one platform. So rather than so basically trying to combine a lot of these smaller, very valuable community-focused youth initiatives into one platform where you can find their contacts and results of work, but also mobilize that voice in one space. So for the person who's proposing that in the question and answer box, I think INSAF's message of don't wait for the government to take you seriously on that. Take action now on your platform that brings together all these different youth initiatives under one umbrella. So Willard, I think you've taken action now, and we're coming to the end of the panel, so we'll be moving on to Regina soon. So Willard and Alex, just any last message of hope to the audience, and then we'll come to you, Regina.
Okay, what I can say is that we youths, we are not going to stop. We are going to remain active, and we are not going to start with a big. We are going to start with a small action that is we can manage, even there's no fund, but we can start from the small to change something in the community, not waiting until we come up with a big project, but we can start with a small. But we are not going to stop. We are going to remain active. We need support from all the associations that can support us, government and all the associations. We are alive. Thank you very much.
We are alive. What a great message. And Alex, just to close us up to the panel and move on to hearing from Regina, any final words?
Yeah, I think it's always hard, as we have seen so far, but I think you always need to work with what you got. So if like an online platform would be amazing, of course, with all sort of different young people from different backgrounds. Yeah, and you just start what you can do, so what's necessary, and then you see what is possible, and then hopefully we do the impossible afterwards. So yeah, we need to start somewhere. So yeah, definitely being active is a good start for that.
Brilliant. So thank you very much to my panelists. And we're now going to head to some closing remarks. I have to say this panel has given me a huge amount of hope. We've seen the Youth for Climate Manifesto featured in COP26. I think it's fully within our grasp with people like this working on initiatives and actions on the ground to see youth taken seriously in the global platform for disaster risk reduction. I can see that in the future spinning out from how they were taken seriously in climate action. Saying that, Regina Guillen, I'd like to introduce the Deputy Head of Multilateral Affairs for the Division of Disaster Risk Reduction Division and Team Leader, of Disaster Risk Reduction. I can't introduce her for too long because we'll run out of time, but I can tell you she has a vast amount of experience from assignments in the field of development cooperation and humanitarian aid in a variety of different national contexts, from Burundi and Tajikistan, Russia, DRC, an absolute wealth of experience. And so, Regina, you've heard, from young people and youth today, we are alive. We are taking ourselves seriously. We will not wait to take action. There's also been a call for education and funding. So, Regina, to bring this all together from a government partner perspective, please, what's the take from the government partner side?
Daisy, thanks a lot for moderating this session and all the panels for being so open and frank with all your thoughts and also recommendations, but also asks, so that you came forward. And I think it's important to have this open and frank discussion, and it is a real pleasure to be here. So I listened carefully, of course, and sitting on the other side of the table, if I can say it like this. So maybe to say a few words what Switzerland does and how we work on the topic of disaster risk reduction. For us, and Switzerland is a mountainous country, as you know. We have others here like Eric, which comes from Austria. So like a lot of you said, living with hazards is something which we experience when winter comes, when avalanche season starts, etc. So depending where you grow up, but there are different hazards. And now the COVID also showed how globalized everything is, and how everything is connected, and how we rely on each other. So from having said this, for us, we advocate in Switzerland, but also in international cooperation, for a whole of society approach, and which means there are all all different constituencies, stakeholders, etc., are important to address disaster risk. That's not only one single stakeholder. Of course, there are responsibilities are defined with the different stakeholders, but everybody has a stake in it and has also share in it, and an interest also. And for this also, I think it's really important to have the youth included in this conversation on a local, on a national, but also on an international level, as an equal and partner and diverse stakeholder. So, and we have examples where actually where it goes in right directions. Of course, a lot needs to be done, but there are good examples out there. And one we just heard also this morning in the minister roundtable of the DRR, I was listening to Rebecca Freitag, and it was really important that she was speaking up as a member of the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, and also bringing this mirror to the decision makers, which sat on the table, and bringing the voice of and the thoughts and the preoccupations of the youth. And I thought this was really good. And the major group on children and youth also did a great job in 2015 when the Sendai framework was negotiated. So also there, the major group was involved, and these are on an international level important moments where the youth are important stakeholders to also be involved in these processes. And we have today the European platform for DRR. We had the Latin America and the Caribbean, the African and the Middle East. And Asia is postponed for next year, but then also next year we have the global platform. And then another important moment, I think, where it's important that the youth are present. That's one thing. But what we do as Switzerland, for example, we in our Switzerland, as the delegation that we had Switzerland to the COP26 in Glasgow, we had a youth representative, a youth delegate, and she did really a good job to negotiate, like the other delegates or the other members of the delegates of Switzerland. She had to negotiate at the COP and had mandates to do it, and had the competencies to do it. So also there we show, yes, it's possible that we work together in the same direction. When it comes to resources, another point which you said, and again there, yes, definitely, a lot of engagement activity can be done with either very few resources or even, as you said before, non-resources. But then there are also activities, engagement projects which need some resources. Also there, we have we support the Switzerland several initiatives. I would like to highlight, of course, one, and this is the 1 Million Youth Action Challenge, which only started. So it's a very fresh new initiative which Switzerland launched, and really to also bring together, and I'm very happy to have ISAF and also Willard, which are ambassadors, and we hope to even have more and more and more ambassadors which reach out with this information to the young generation and to welcome all and mobilize young people which take part in this initiative, because the initiative is on doing. It's not only about awareness raising, it's really also doing action and doing projects in the schools, in their environment, in their community, etc. Where, as you said, it has not always to be big things, but it has to be constant and things which are really doing a difference. And even if it's in a family level, community level, school level, it doesn't matter. Important is that we do it and constantly do it and keep on going it. And there also the 1 million action challenge, the 1 YAC, we really, it's also a funding mechanism, a crowdfunding mechanism behind, which we hope that will be filled also as more and more youth are active and as more we can also then support, especially the ones which don't have other funding pots beside. So this is one important action for us, which we are lobbying and we are putting up. And we have our colleague Daniel, which is somewhere behind, but it's actually the head of the brain of this whole initiative. And it came also up, as you saw in the film, out of a initiative which we were first starting with advocacy, but now it's really on action, and we want to invite the young people, the young generation, to take action. Another thing what we do in Switzerland is it's called Etuki National competition, where students are encouraged to take initiative and to imagine concrete actions and come up with concrete actions, and which are then, as I think it was also Willard proposing, like a prize behind, so they can be awarded with a financial support and which also encourage. It covers costs, but it also encourages to continue to keep being active on the topic of DRR and but also linked also to climate change. So I'm also happy that I hear Eric and Alex from your work on a more scientific angle, and I think also this to encourage. It has to do with educational and the system. It has to do with access, as you say, but it has also to do with being passionate and seeing also and having the willingness to work on this topic. And we had to put in the Mentimeter, and to be honest, I also participated, and I put experience a little bit more. I'm working on DRR since about a little bit more than 10 years. And if people ask me, but what is a DRR specialist? They're so broad. It depends which kind of angle you come in. It can be from natural science. It can be from a more finance, insurance thinking. It can be from a medical point of view. It depends. And there's no one specific education behind. But I think what's most important is there are different entry points, but it's really a risk thinking, to incorporate this in our thinking. Whatever we do, it can reduce risk, it can increase risk, or it can be keep the risk level as it is. So, and this thinking to incorporate in what we do and in our daily life and in our profession, I think that's one. And so there can be a lot of different backgrounds can be then at the end a DRR specialist. It depends a little bit from which angle we work on it. And maybe last point to conclude, also for us again, I heard about the Sendai framework. There's the Paris Agreement. There is the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. And for us, a coherent approach to all these frameworks are important, be it on international level, but be it also on on a national and subnational level. At the end, everything is interlinked, and even if we look at the indicators, even there are interlinked. So I think if we put the people at the center, then we approach all these different frameworks from the different angle, and we do a coherent approach in the analysis, but also in bringing answers. So having all put out this, again, I hope that there is still hope. I believe in it. I believe that we have it in our own hands. Wherever we sit, be it on the governmental side, be it on the implementer side, in organizations, be it as a community member, be it as a family member. We have it in our own hand, and we are here to take action. And I hope really that this wealth of enthusiasm and this, but also reflected enthusiasm that you have, and this engagement that you carry on, that you will continue to carry on in all what you do, and that you become or you stay an active member of the community for disaster risk reduction. Thank you. We can't hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you, Regina. Wonderful words from Regina Guillen there. Personally giving me hope and motivation to return to my own work on disaster risk reduction after this. A wonderful example of a decision maker taking youth seriously, and she's going to continue doing that. So there is hope in there. It's really, we've run a few minutes over time, and so it's just up to me to say thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our audience. Please take forward the messages that we've heard from Insa, from Willard, from Eric, from Alex. Encourage people to take action now and keep going. So thank you very much, and have a lovely afternoon, morning, wherever you're listening from.